Well, today we're wrapping up a series that we've called With. Well, we've been examining the power of life together. And I want to wrap this up by going way back to when we were kids. Do you remember going trick-or-treating? A few of you? Those were good days, weren't they? Remember when you'd go to the store with mom or dad and you'd buy that special Halloween mask? Masks were really cool when we were kids. Because a mask allowed you to become something or someone that you weren't, right? So if you weren't a doctor, you could be a doctor with a mask. If you weren't a superhero, you could become a superhero with a mask. If you weren't a zombie, you could become a zombie, I guess. This was never my style. I was afraid of stuff like that, so I went trick-or-treating during the day. But you could become anything. But what they don't tell you when you buy that mask, and there should be a label on the box that says, within 5 seconds of wearing this mask, your face will sweat more than you thought was humanly possible. It just ruined trick-or-treating because you were just always hot, right? There's a downside to this becoming someone that you weren't. I would say it like this. In short order, enjoyment becomes employment, right? You're having fun, it turns into work because you're just trying to muddle your way through. Then you and I grew up, right? We became adults, and adults don't do childish things like that most of the time, right? Like, that's just not what we do anymore. But I've found in my adult years, and feel free to disagree with me, but what I've found is that everyone still wears a mask every day. But we're creative, and we found a way to make our masks look like us so that no one knows we're actually wearing one. In case you don't think I'm, saying the right thing here, let's talk about a couple that a few of us might wear. Let's start with one that I'll call the June Cleaver mask. If you don't know what Leave It to Beaver is, Google it today. And what you're going to find is a mom who always has it together. The perfect house, the perfect pie, the perfect children, the perfect husband, right? This is a mask that a lot of us find ourselves wearing. And you don't even have to be a mom or a woman to wear this mask. There's something in us that wants everybody else to think that we've got it all together. So we post the right things on social media, we drive the right things, we wear the right things, we say the right things so that everybody thinks, man, they really are something. But that's hard to keep up for very long. If you don't wear the June Cleaver mask, you might wear the Arnold Schwarzenegger mask. This is the I'm always strong, nothing ever phases me, I don't get sad, I don't get afraid, I don't get anything. If you've got something you're afraid of, I'll not be afraid of it for you, right? A lot of the guys will wear this where we just think we've got to be tough all of the time. But if we were being honest, if someone could take an x-ray and look at the inside of us, they'd find that scared little child is still there. But we put on the mask so no one knows. Some of us grew up and we got really good grades and we were an achiever and everybody would pat us on the back. So we found the Einstein mask. And we wear the Einstein mask all the time that it has us always going above and beyond. We're always trying the new thing, the better thing. We're the one making the best grades. We're getting the promotion. We're buying the bigger house, driving the faster car because we're that person. Or so we try to present that person. And again, if you could see on the inside, you might find something totally different. And we wear these masks in all kinds of different arenas in our life. We wear them privately when no one is looking because sometimes we like to fool ourselves. We certainly wear them relationally and socially when we're out, but we even wear them spiritually. Christians have masks that we put on because we're supposed to look a certain way. We're supposed to talk a certain way and be a certain way. The problem with this for all of us, all these different masks that we wear, and we've all got one, right? And some of us might wear the same kind, it just looks a little bit different, but no matter what that is, I would say there's a few things that are true in that, the sweaty side of the mask. We're starved for authenticity in our life. We just want something real. More and more in our society, everything is produced. Think about that. You put a filter on every picture you ever post. We only let the best parts of us show. It's a production, and it is exhausting. And we're tired. We get home at night, and we're tired of playing the part. Because this is what I do sometimes. There's a Josh that watches SportsCenter and eats pizza and loves donuts and yells at his kids. And then there's the Josh that gets up on stage and does the videos and blah, blah, blah. And that's the part that this Josh plays. And we've all got that, right? There's this part that we play at work, at school, when we're around our family, when we're around the in-laws, right? We have this part that we put on, this mask that we put on. And we're just tired. And part of the fatigue comes from being lonely. We're just tired of being lonely. And we're lonely because when we're wearing a mask, we have to keep everyone at arm's length, because if they get too close, they'll know. If they get too close, they'll see that it's not really us. And so we're afraid of letting people in. And because we're afraid of letting people in, we're afraid of community, because there's a foundational principle to community. There's a foundational principle to life together. And it's this: proximity leads to sincerity. The closer people get to one another, the less fake those people can be with each other. The closer you get to the center of my life and my heart and all of that kind of stuff, the harder it becomes for me to fool you. And this is true for all of us, right? This is why we keep people at arm's length, because we know if they get closer, we're going to have to start being more sincere. We can't just say the line anymore. We can't just play the part anymore. They're going to get to know the real us, and that is terrifying. The good news for you and for me is that we will not be the first people to struggle with this. Even in the Bible, where you would imagine it to just be full of perfect people, you find imperfect people that struggle with a lot of the same things that you and I struggle with every day. And what I want to do today is look at a moment where proximity led to sincerity. And it's between one guy that I love and I talk about all the time. He's my favorite person in the scriptures after Jesus. And he comes in close proximity with a guy who I'm terrified to meet one day. Peter and Paul lock horns. And there's a disagreement or a confrontation between the two that happens in the context of a relationship. And I think it's so important for us to see and to understand what community develops in us. So if you want to follow along in your own Bible or on your phone, we're going to be in Galatians today, which is Paul's letter to a community of Christians in a town called Galatia. So he's writing to the Galatian people. That's why we call it that. We're going to start in chapter 2, right at verse 6. This is what Paul writes, and I love this because Paul can get kind of sassy sometimes. He says, "And the leaders of the church had nothing to add to what I was preaching. By the way, their reputation as great leaders made no difference to me, for God has no favorites." So, like I said, you just got to throw that jab in there. I'm not scared of them. In a minute, he's going to refer to them as the pillars of the church. You see, who he's talking about are what I'll call the somebodies in the Christian community, in the religious community in that day and age. These were the Peters and the Jameses and the Johns and the big-time people in the church. And we'll use quotations, big-time people. And Paul says, listen, I'm not afraid of them. I don't really care about their reputation. Because what I care about is something different. And when we talk about the somebodies, here's what's so interesting about the somebodies, is they come with this name that everybody knows. They come with this reputation. That's what Paul refers to. And what happens, and maybe you've been in this situation, when you get a name that precedes you or a reputation that precedes you, it somehow, some way becomes the part that you play. It becomes the mask that you wear. Even though that thing maybe started as genuine, even though it maybe started as a really good thing, it's something now that you have to perpetuate. It's something you have to keep up because it seemed to get you liked initially, and now you've got to keep everybody liking you, so you keep doing those things even though you don't feel like it sometimes. And so the somebodies are this group of people that, if I'm getting inside their head a little bit, understand they have a reputation to uphold. And so they come rolling in, and Paul says, listen, we don't play that game here. You see, if I understand the gospel correctly, then we are all on equal playing field. Because the gospel, the cross, is the great equalizer, because we're all in need of grace and forgiveness and mercy. And so Paul says, listen, you might think you're a somebody, but in my book, we're same bodies. Because it's not your name that we're coming together around. It's not your reputation or your accomplishments that we're coming around. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if that's the case, then we are all the same. We're all in equal need of grace and mercy and forgiveness. And so you might come with a reputation, but it doesn't hold water here. And I think that that's really important because in a room this size, there are all kinds of people here. Some of us are Christians that have been Christians for a very long time. And that's a title that we kind of carry. We're way down the road, right? And people that aren't Christians or newer to the faith come along and they look at you with starry eyes. They've been a Christian for a long time. Same thing if you work at a church or you're a missionary, right? You become a somebody, and it's this mask or this part that you kind of have to keep going. But according to Paul, none of us should be intimidated by any of the others of us because the gospel is at the center. This is how I know that that's what he thinks. It's because of what he says in the very next sentence. He says, instead, they saw that God had given me the responsibility of preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, or people that aren't Jewish, just as he had given Peter the responsibility of preaching to the Jews. So in the first century, we've got this really interesting dynamic that the disciples, namely Peter, who had walked around with Jesus, he gets charged with, you're going to reach the Jewish people and help them understand that Jesus is the Messiah. And then, remember last week, he meets Paul on the road to Damascus, and he says, you're going to go to all the non-Jewish people in the world, and you are going to teach them that Jesus is the living Son of God who takes away the sin of the world. And what's so incredible about that is that the message to both of them is essentially the same. Paul points out we have different audiences, meaning we have different contexts in which we do ministry, but the ministry is the same. What Paul is in effect doing is he's taking Peter's name out of the middle and he's putting Jesus' name in the center, what I'm going to call the orienting point of reference. And what Paul does is he makes the gospel the orienting point of reference. In other words, everything gets oriented around the gospel, not around the fact that Peter is who Peter is. Now think about it. If Peter were me, I would have said things to people like, do you know who I am? I walked on water for like a little bit. Jesus forgave me 3 times. I mean, let's not talk about why it was 3 times, but he did forgive me 3 times, made me breakfast on the beach. Don't know if you know this, but Jesus called me the rock on who he was going to build his church. I'm kind of a big deal. It would have been easy for Peter to be that. It would have been easy for everybody around Peter to do that and just say, well, we're going to follow Peter. And Peter is going to be who we orient our whole life around. And Paul says that is not how it works. Whether you're preaching to Jews or to Gentiles, the center of it all is the gospel. And what's interesting is when that became the center, it led to authenticity. It led to vulnerability and exposure for Peter. And we're going to see how that plays out in living color in just a minute. But when this is the center and you all come around it, it will inevitably prove true that proximity leads to sincerity. Because if you start to wander away from the thing that everything is oriented around, someone's going to go, where are you going? Come on back. You're making that about you, or you're making that about them, and it is not about those things. It's about the gospel. That's what Paul got invited into in a very profound and specific way. And that's what he talks about in the very next verse. He says, in fact, James, and by the way, this James is the brother of Jesus, James. I could spend a month talking about James being the brother of Jesus and saying that Jesus is the Son of God. That is a mind bender. But this is James, who's kind of running the church in Jerusalem. In fact, James, Peter, and John, who were known as pillars of the church, recognized the gift God had given me, and they accepted Barnabas and me as their co-workers. Now, it's easy to read through this and go, well, that's nice. You guys are getting along. But some of you are reading a different translation of the Bible, maybe the NIV or the ESV, or there's 100 of them, and they maybe translated this just a little bit different. For instance, if you're seeing the name Cephas come up over and over again, that's Peter's Jewish name. So we're talking about the same guy. Don't worry, you're not in the wrong spot. But when you see these words, they accepted us as their co-workers, your translation might mention a very interesting thing that Paul refers to as the right hand of fellowship. They offered me the right hand of fellowship. And it's funny to me because this is another thing that we do all the time but never quite understand where it came from. We shake hands all the time. Have you ever noticed this? We'll shake, hello, good to see you, glad you're here, and we shake hands. But back in the day, it had such a more profound meaning. And it had a profound meaning for more than just Jewish people. If you extended the right hand of fellowship, it was a loaded transaction. It was so loaded that the Romans actually put it on their money. And if you were to find all kinds of Roman coins, you're going to find two right hands grasping each other, because that had significance to them. And then you're going to find usually one of three words stamped onto the coin around the rim. One of those would be fide, which has to do with trust. So extending the right hand of fellowship meant I trust you. Another word you might see is concordia, which has to do with harmony. So if I extend the right hand of fellowship, it means we have harmony with one another. And then finally, the last word you might see would be consensus, that has to do with unity. And so it's not just a, hey, how you doing, glad to see you. It's a statement about our relationship. So when Paul says, James and Peter and John and all those pillars of the church extended the right hand of fellowship to me, what he's saying is they said that we're going to have a relationship centered on trust, harmony, and unity. This was an invitation into those things. And with each of those things, it's less and less easy to be fake. If I'm really going to trust you, I've got to have the real you. If we're really going to have harmony with one another, I have to have the real you. And if we are going to have unity, I need the real you. So that's what this is all loaded with. And that sets the table for what is about to happen. Because at this point you go, cool, every Christian just gets along and there's no problems. And community sounds awesome. Trust, harmony, and unity. And then Paul drops the hammer. He says, but when Peter came to Antioch, which is kind of the center of the Christian world at this time, I had to oppose him to his face. This is why I'm nervous to meet Paul. Because he's going to have something to say to me, I'm sure. I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. And what he says next is what he did. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised, which have been a no-no. They didn't even go in Gentile homes. They would have waited outside. So sitting down for a meal with them would have made you unclean. You don't do that as a Jew. But afterward, when some friends of James came, in other words, more pillars of the church, the somebodies from Jerusalem showed up, Peter wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of criticism from these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. You see, what happens is Peter's life in the gospel, the freedom that came with the gospel, comes right up against the law. And at this day and in this time, there were all kinds of people who were open to the idea of Jesus, but really believed you still had to be a good Jew. You still had to do all the Jewish things. And if you didn't, then you couldn't be serious about the Jewish Messiah or salvation. And so what Peter would do is he'd play to his audience. If it was just Gentiles, hey, cool, let's eat. But if Jews showed up, well, then he would actually try to make the Gentiles do it the Jewish way. And so what's interesting is depending on the people we're with, sometimes our mask looks different. Because we want those people to accept us. And if we were to just take the mask off and be us, then we are vulnerable, and all of us are afraid of vulnerability, which is why he says Peter was afraid. If he were to continue eating with the Gentiles in front of his Jewish friends, then he'd be open to criticism. He'd be open to all kinds of finger pointing and disapproval and you're wrong and all of that, and it would have been so uncomfortable. So what does Peter do? He puts on his good Jewish mask to insulate himself from that fear and criticism and vulnerability. That's what every mask that you ever wear in your life is all about. It's about you insulating yourself from what could happen if you were exposed, if you were honest, if you were authentic, if you were sincere. What would happen next? That's what we really are afraid of. What will people's reaction to me be if I let them see what's just underneath the surface? But Paul's not afraid to go there with Peter. Why? Because Peter had extended the right hand of fellowship to Paul. He had invited him in to trust and unity and harmony. So Paul goes on to address this in verse 13. As a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. You've heard us talk about this word before. It's actually a theatrical term. Hypocrisy is when you wear a mask in the theater. That's what the first hypocrites were. So we get our word for being fake from the theater where they actually would wear a mask to be fake. And so Paul comes along and he says, listen, Peter, it's not okay that you're wearing this. It's not okay that you're playing this game. Why? Because it's contagious. Hypocrisy is contagious, and other people are going to start to do the same thing. Being fake breeds being fake. Why? Because I'm playing my part, you're playing your part, they're playing their part, and that's how we make it work. So if we were to all take that off, wouldn't it all just explode? So no, we're gonna keep it how it is, and if you're gonna enter into this community, you better find one too, because we don't want you to mess it up. That's kind of how it works. And so Paul comes along and he says, here's the problem. You have put the somebodies in the middle again. You've made this relationship all about this expectation of each other versus the truth of the gospel. And I want to just keep reminding us the only reason Paul can do this with them is because they had extended the right hand of fellowship to him. They said, you're one of us. I don't have anything to add to what you're preaching, which means it's true. So I'm inviting that truth into this relationship. And because Paul acted on that, and because he insisted on everybody living authentically, things changed. Peter changed. But before we move on from Galatians, I just want you to see how Paul kind of wraps this up. Because he, again, drives it all back to what everybody had oriented this relationship around in the first place, the gospel. Verse 14. When I saw that they were not following the truth of the gospel message, I said to Peter in front of the others, since you, a Jew by birth, have discarded the Jewish laws and are living like a Gentile, why are you now trying to make these Gentiles follow the Jewish traditions? Let's call a spade a spade. Paul says, you've made the Jewish traditions the center. And we've been talking for weeks and months and maybe even years by this point that that's not the center. That's not what brings us together. It's that Jesus died and rose again, and in so doing, offered forgiveness for sin. Period. A forgiveness that you can't earn and you don't deserve, but is given freely. You see, proximity leads to sincerity. They allowed Paul to get closer and closer. And the closer he got, the more he saw that there was hypocrisy going on, that there was some fakeness going on, there was playing to an audience going on, and he insisted that we're making this about something other than what it should be about. And we can't have that. That is the power of life together. That's the power of the word with, is that it insists on authentically living our lives. It's an invitation for others to take their mask off when they're with us and for us to take ours off when we're with them. You see, the truth is, community answers the thing we're so starved for. We all want to get done with this exhaustion that is just us trying to keep up with whatever it is that we've presented to the world. We want a place where we can just be. And God says, I got a place. It's called community. But like we said, this is really scary, because even though we don't want it, we know we still keep arm's length, right? We still keep people at a distance. And I just want to touch on a little bit of why we probably do that, what our fear in community is. And maybe this is just me, but I think you'll hear me on some of this. First, I think we're afraid of rejection. We're not really afraid of community. We're afraid that we'll be ousted from the community, because a certain us got us in. And if we're not that us anymore, then we're going to be out. Isn't that interesting? There's always something behind the something. It's never that I don't want to have close friends. It's that I don't want my close friends to know the real me, because then they won't want to be my close friend. I'm afraid of rejection. Or we might be like Peter and we're afraid of criticism. We just don't want people telling us we might be wrong. We don't want people telling us that they think differently than us, or that they don't like what we did. And if I keep people out here at a safe distance, then they can't do that, because they won't be able to touch the parts of me that are vulnerable and real. For some of us, it's just simple disapproval. It's not that they're going to kick us out of the group. It's not even that they're going to say anything. We just don't like living every day with someone might not like us or what we did. And so we go, you know what? I don't know that that is worth it. I'm going to keep them here and keep this on. But what I hope we start to get to by the end of this series today is that there's better things to look forward to in community, that we've gotten so afraid of a possible outcome that we've lost the probable ones. And the probable outcomes of real, genuine community, where there's been a right hand of fellowship extended, is that you and I might get to experience harmony with other people. And how different would that be in a world where we can't even get along with our neighbor because we don't like their dog? To actually have harmony with other people and get along, not because we're all the same. You understand that, right? Harmony, no one's singing the same note in harmony. Do you ever know that? Unison is when you sing the same note. But in harmonies, it's different notes that come together and make something even more beautiful. So just because you get into community and you're seeking harmony doesn't mean you're going to become just like them. But together, you might be something incredible. In community, you and I would probably get to experience trust, real trust, which is a precious commodity in this day and age. Who do you trust anymore? But when we bring people together around the gospel that, again, is this great equalizer and puts us all on equal playing field, and it's all about Jesus, not about me, then I can trust that. We might experience unity. For the first time, we'd experience unity. And I believe in those things, it's where your faith will really come to life. Isolation is not the place we experience all of the greatness that is a life following Jesus. We say it all the time, but I really mean it. Our best chance of getting closer to Jesus is with other people. Having community that's following him together, because I'm going to get tired, I'm going to get lost, I'm going to get confused, and I need somebody that loves me to come alongside of me and tell me the truth. And it changes things. It changed things for Peter. This is the same Peter that was playing the game with the two different audiences. You go to Acts chapter 15, he stands in front of the same pillars of the church, the same friends of James, and this is what he says about Jews and Gentiles. God made no distinction between us and them, for he cleansed their hearts through faith. You go, man, Paul was mean getting in Peter's business. No, Paul loved Peter, and he wanted him to know the truth. And the truth changed him forever. And then Peter stands in front of this group of people and he says, listen, let me tell you the gospel truth. Let's build a relationship around that. You see, proximity for Peter led to sincerity. Allowing Paul to get a little bit closer and a little bit closer changed him. And so for us around here, the reason we talk about community groups all the time, and we're always encouraging you to join a group, it's not so that we can have a big number of people that are in groups. It's because we really believe it's the best way for us to grow. We really believe it leads to our best life, because with allows us to engage socially, it allows us to explore intentionally, to heal holistically, to deepen intellectually, and to live authentically. The life that we're all wanting doesn't happen by ourselves. It happens with others and God being at the center of it. So today, as we've had for the last 2 weeks, group life is all over the place out in the foyer. And if you're interested in taking that step and you feel God may be nudging you in that direction, don't leave before you talk to somebody today. They'll help you get connected with people where you'll find trust and harmony and unity. But for some of us, we're on board, but we're not ready to take that kind of leap. There's another way I believe that we can get connected with other people that's maybe not as intimidating. And it's really just joining a volunteer team. And here's why I'm going to bring this up now, because I've learned something about the difference between women and men. And I believe this is kind of archetypal data, so I'll try and back it up at some point. But this is just my opinion. I don't connect well over a cup of coffee at a small little table. Men especially have a hard time face to face. You know how men connect best? Shoulder to shoulder. This is why your husband or your boyfriend or your brother or whatever guy you have in your life is not usually going to call his best buddy and go, do you want to go grab a cup of coffee? It's not going to happen. You know what they're going to say? Want to go for a bike ride? Want to come help me fix the car? Want to paint my house with me? Want to rake leaves? Let's do something together. And then what you're going to find is they're out there talking all day long. This is why my wife and I go on dates up to Milwaukee, because she's smarter than me and she knows how to get me talking. And she knows that it's about a 45-minute drive to Milwaukee, shoulder to shoulder. And I'll spill my guts to her. So what would it look like if you're feeling like I need to get connected with some other people in deeper ways, for you to just volunteer on a team? Do something together. And you might find some of your very best friends that way. So I want to invite all of you to what we're calling Launch next Sunday night, where it's for our volunteers, everybody that's going to be volunteering in the fall, and that's a ton of people. A lot of you are sitting in this room. They're going to come out and they're going to hear about the vision for the fall and where we're going in each individual ministry. But what we're going to do this year, unlike any other year, is we're opening it up to anybody that would like to come. If you're just even remotely interested in connecting in this way here at church, we'd love for you to come to Launch next Sunday night. Put it on your calendar. There's a card on your seat. And you got to make me a promise you're not going to, in fact, why don't you grab it right now, have it in your hand so you don't leave it on your seat. I want you to really think about coming out and just hearing about the different ways that you could get plugged in and find community in a simple way. And that simple way is just serving someone else. And that can be a part of your growing to be like Jesus. You see, life together, whether it's in a living room or over a cup of coffee or helping kids know Jesus and grow to be like him with someone else. Life together is just better. And we grow in ways that we can't grow by ourselves. So make this year unlike any other year in your faith journey and get connected with other people so that you can experience the power of with. I want to pray for you, but I don't want you to get up and leave when I say amen. Okay? Because I know amen is like the shotgun on a race and everybody just wants to go. I want to invite you to something important, so let me pray. God, thanks for loving us enough to give us people. Thanks for loving us enough to give us relationships, because the truth is, Lord, if we didn't have those, we would really be lost. And as we've spent the last several weeks exploring all that comes from those person-to-person relationships, Lord, we're just in awe of how you use things in ways that we would never imagine to use them. So my prayer for those of us that are a little intimidated and overwhelmed and hesitant to get plugged into community, my prayer is that you would give them courage to take a bold step, whether that's plugging into a community group or serving in some capacity. God, none of us want to do this life alone, and we are all tired of the masks that we've been wearing. So help us to find the people that we can connect deeply with and to take them off so that we can grow closer to you as you are at the center of that relationship. We love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.